Kim Snyder is a filmmaker known for her emotionally charged 2016 documentary, Newtown, about the lives of the Sandy Hook Elementary School victims. Among others, she's at South by Southwest EDU this year screening Us Kids, which documents a gun control advocacy campaign organized by the Parkland, Florida student survivors. Please welcome Kim Snyder to the South by Southwest studio. Hello, I'm really excited to talk to you because I'm so interested in your topic, and I really want to know, so you're here for a screening and a Q&A of Us Kids. What inspired you to make this documentary?
Well, as you said, I had made this 3-year epic film in my life, Newtown, where I spent years with that community in Sandy Hook, that we all remember that tragic shooting where 20 first graders were murdered and their 6 teachers. And honestly, I thought I was done with that issue. And I was working on another documentary project in Florida, oddly, and was on the steps of the Capitol in the capital of Tallahassee when Parkland, the shooting happened at the high school. And now it wasn't first graders, it was high schoolers. And busloads of kids arrived at the Capitol, and I was there with my camera. So I thought, okay, I'm supposed to do this. I need to do this. I went down to Parkland and I started to make connections there, got to know some of the kids that were starting, people like David Hogg, and that became sort of household faces. Emma Gonzalez, she now goes by X Gonzalez. And I just followed them for 3 years. And that, whereas Newtown was really more about collective grief in a community and these families and the ripple effects in a town, this was about a whole youth movement. And this was about rage and transforming that rage into action.
Well, I think Sandy Hook was the first time we saw a shooting of that caliber at a school. And so many years later, we've had so many up until the point you got to Parkland. It's almost like the story came to you instead of you looking for the story. Did the end result turn out like you thought it would be?
The end result of the film?
Mm-hmm.
It never does. It's never it's never exactly what you envision. But I think in terms of what happened that we chronicled, what's interesting about being here at EDU is that when people would say to me after the film and after Sandy Hook, when I would tour with it, they would say, well, if nothing happened on the federal level to really address the epidemic of gun violence after that, nothing will. And so people were demoralized. And then the kids happened. And that felt like a game changer. And it was. They did certain things that were extraordinary to change. And we always talk about movements take time. So these were chips in the armor, but important moments, red letter dates. And one of the things I always say is the conversation did change after Newtown. And one of the ways it changed was that certain voices were becoming louder. The youth was certainly a big one, but one of those constituencies were teachers, were educators, and their voices were, and I kept saying, we need to hear from the voices of the teachers and the doctors and the clergy and the law enforcement. And that did start to happen. So for me, it's just so paramount and important to bring this film here to educators, because they are the ones who really have such skin in the game with this issue often.
I mean, how did this journey of the film, how did it shape you as a person?
Well, it's been 8 or 9 years. I also made a short in between that was related to this. I've become a fierce advocate. I don't really want to use the word activist, and I don't like to use the word gun control even, because I think it's gun violence prevention. Mm-hmm. Because I've become so close to so many people who've been affected. It's now the #1 killer of youth under 19 in this country, which is sort of shocking.
That's a staggering statistic.
It is the #1 killer. And for young men of color, way higher, as you can imagine. So I feel it's life work that way. As an artist, as a filmmaker, it's a body of work now that I'm, and with Us Kids, I really felt It it changed me because I got in touch with Gen Z and learned so much about so many, I think, stereotypes, not necessarily that I had, that society has at large. Came in somewhat with a blank slate. I don't have kids, and so it was just like, wow, this is really interesting. There was a lot of mutual respect. It was very collaborative, and one of the things I'm proudest of is most people I know of that age really respond to the film. So it wasn't like, oh, this is something that some person generations older than us made. It really feels connected, and that it renders an authentic voice.
I mean, this generation, Gen Z that you're working with, they grew up with school shootings as being something that's present in their lives. And they did something really different. I mean, they flipped the narrative. How was that to watch them actually take control of their own story?
I saw them as patriots. I saw them as, on surface, their packaging often seemed like these kind of kids, here in Texas. They would go out and talk to people from opposing views, and they were in their little shorts. It was summertime, and clean cut. They didn't look like hippies from the, they just looked like these kids, and they were so brilliant. And I would look at them and think, they're no different than any other people who've done things throughout history, probably some of them right now over in Europe, who just are acting out of a commitment to uphold democracy, to avenge the deaths of their friends that they saw murdered in front of them, and make sure that maybe something could change so that the next generation wouldn't go through that. So I had deep admiration and respect, and people who thought certain things, they wrote their own speeches. There were no people coming and writing for them. They would sit on buses. They didn't party. They were like exhausted. It was tough. I went to 50 cities across the country.
Wow.
Pretty much with them. So it was an extraordinary learning, and I'm still close with many of them.
Were there any surprises during the filming?
Sure. I think death threats to especially people like David that were targeted. Shocking the way people could go after
Kids.
And I think trauma looks different in kids than adults. You can't, it threw me back to when I was a teenager. Certain things that you would, there's a resilience, for better or worse, that you push things down a lot. You don't want to show it. And a lot of stuff can be going on in your house, and you just sort of stuff it. So they had a lot of trauma, but just you'd never really see them curl up and give up. There's just the nature of youth too. It's like this undying energy and hope, which is why young people are often at the forefront of movements.
Do you think that having that community of all of them having that shared experience gave them a strength or a bravery?
Absolutely. At one point I asked one of the guys, Cameron, what seems like a really stupid question now about when they turned out what became the largest youth protest since the Vietnam War on March 24th, almost 4 years ago to the day, why they felt it was so important to do in person where there's so much online power in the internet. And he said, because it's real, because, you can make things up on the internet. You can make things look, so that day was one of the most historically memorable days in my life as a documentarian and as a person. Just shocking to see Sam, who's in the film, who at that point had been shot in her classroom 4 times with an AR-15, had never spoken publicly in her life, get up in front of 1 million people and 6 continents and just give the most amazing speech, and vomited in the middle of it, by the way. It was memorable. but they just were, the resilience was extraordinary.
After shooting this film, do you feel more or less optimistic about the future of gun control?
Oh boy. I feel like a lot of people incredibly frustrated that nothing happens. And I showed the film in Boulder in May. We were brought out there after they had their supermarket shooting. And, there's just all these communities that join this club that no one wants to belong to. And the numbers grow and we're becoming more and more inured to it. Like we're not even noticing. So in that sense, I feel demoralized like the kids. But real quick, I'll tell you one reason why I don't. 4 years ago, almost to the date, after their shooting, they did get passed in Florida, which, like Texas, is a tough place to pass state laws, a law that raised the age, and it also meant that you had to wait 72 hours to make sure that someone wasn't an unstable individual. 2 weeks ago, my own niece in Florida in college had a shooting scare on her campus where a kid threatened to shoot up the campus and had gone out and bought an AR-15. They knew that. Because of that law that those kids passed, they deterred him because he had to wait 72 hours. That would not have happened before the Parkland shooting. And I said to them, you may well have saved my niece's life. So
Wow.
That's a very specific thing that my point is the state laws matter.
Yeah.
The laws state by state matter, and they can save lives.
So what has been the reaction to your film since releasing it? I mean, especially in places like this where it's very pro-gun kind of community.
Well, we'll see tonight because sadly I was invited to South by when it opened, but in the midst of COVID, we haven't had that many opportunities to show it in person, which is, done a lot of Zooming like the rest of the world. So for filmmakers, this is sort of like, oh yes, I get to interact. So I'm excited, especially, as I said, with educators that are so near and dear. And just another connection is that film Newtown that you mentioned. One of those teachers who protected her second graders, she and I became good friends. And 4 years later, Abby Clements has recently founded something called Teachers Unify. And it's all about congregating and creating community around teachers who are concerned with gun violence.
Oh, just like the Parkland kids, they have each other to lean on.
Yeah.
That's
so
incredible.
People forge on. They do amazing things. So I champion that too.
So us kids, after your award-winning documentary Newtown, which chronicles another mass shooting at the school, how do the tragedies differ in their legacy and impact?
I think Sandy Hook will be forever remembered as the shooting that many people remember. It's a shameful date in American history that everyone will remember where they were when we realized first graders could be shot up in their classroom, and still brings me to tears. I'm so close with some of those parents. And I think it was seeing some of those parents just till this day dedicate their entire lives to making sure another family didn't go through that. And I think the conversation did change, as I said. I think Parkland marked the beginning of a youth movement that went way beyond guns and was very intersectional. And it was an understanding by youth, not just here, but you can see, spoiler, at the end of the movie, there's a tweet between then Emma and, oh my goodness, in Amsterdam. I'm totally blanking. You know who I'm talking about. Global.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's a tweet between them. Greta.
Greta
Thank you. Greta.
Thunberg. Yes.
Yeah, and it's basically she was inspired by the Parkland kids. So there was an understanding that you can't talk about gun violence without talking about racial inequity, without talking about a gazillion other things that all fit together. And I think we're seeing that, since the film came out, COVID and Black Lives Matter, these things all have relationships to one another.
Yeah.
So I think Us Kids for me marks historically the birth of an illustration of a youth movement that is vibrant and not going away.
So what advice would you give educators and administrators when they ask about potential gun violence in school, and what lessons could you share with them?
One of the things is I champion the work that some of those parents that I worked with in Newtown started something called Sandy Hook Promise. So they work a lot with schools and preventing gun violence before it happens. So I try to champion people who have come up with solutions that were voids before.
What do you have any examples of solutions?
They work a lot with sort of know the signs and working with law enforcement and schools themselves to identify signs and have averted shootings before they happen, before we even get to the legislative parts.
Right.
Not that they aren't personally advocates for that. And I think the other lesson for me is just letting young people who are the ones inside these buildings and these classrooms have a say. And I know it's a tricky thing that, this question about how much do you focus on school security and arming teachers and building, more safeguards. It's not to say I think there should be no focus on that, but I think you have to listen to how kids, they're the ones who are feeling vulnerable. If they're old enough to be the ones on the firing line, they should be part of the conversation.
They should be part of the conversation. They are the stakeholders.
They are the stakeholders, and a lot of decisions and things, including how active shooter drills are done. They tell me all the time about either how lame some of the, so I think we need to be lifting up those people who, some of them are now running for school boards and even Congress. There's a 24-year-old in Florida who was involved in the origins of March for Our Lives running for a congressional seat.
Wow.
Yeah, we have to support youth in positions of leadership.
Has your film changed your own views on gun policy or advocacy?
Just made me more passionate about, really how can we get our heads around restoring a civil conversation around this.
Right.
That is not about taking people's guns away or buying into that narrative that they're coming to get your guns, but to think that we all must share the desire to keep guns out of the hands of unstable people who can stockpile them and pull these things off without a lot of checks and balances.
So not leaning into the fear, but looking towards solutions?
Yeah, and also making people accountable.
Yeah.
People who are either doing what they do because of money, from the NRA, or any number of, or more recently, gun manufacturers themselves being held accountable for very dangerous and irresponsible ways of marketing these things and selling them.
You think that that's what needs to happen to turn the tide, is accountability?
I think accountability is huge. I think the White House could be doing more to, there are things that can be done in the executive branch, given that the legislative branch is not moving. The kids wanted a gun czar appointed.
Yeah.
Someone who, when you have something that is epidemic as a health crisis.
So what's next for you after this? I mean,
well,
this is a big deal.
It is, and I don't know. You never know in the beginning, but I hesitantly say that I oddly am here in Austin because I'm exploring a project that's originating right here with women who are actually keynote speakers here in this conference tomorrow, freedom fighters who are working as decade-long librarians to ensure that
oh, so you're taking another easy topic, book
censorship.
banning and censorship. Well, I look forward to seeing what you come up with next.
Thank you.
So, Kim, thank you for joining us in the South by Southwest studio. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Us Kids will be screening tonight at 7 p.m. in the Austin Convention Center South by Southwest Film Theater. The movie will also be available for online screening for 48 hours beginning at 9 a.m. on Tuesday, March 8th, and there's a second in-person screening on Thursday, March 10th at 10:30 a.m.